just one thing I forgot to mention. The only thing that I found that there is a little bit tricky to get back in is you can see how thin the gaskets are on the old timing chain tensioners. Like, there's hardly anything there for a gasket. Super thin. You'll see that when you take it out. And putting this one back in on top of your guide on the, this is on the driver's side, it's tough to snap it past this sharp edge here. So you just got to be careful, and because you don't want to cut that gasket, you can have the same problem that you had when you took it apart. So you just kind of wiggle it in there, push down, and it'll pop in there, but that's a really sharp edge there, so you don't want to hang the gasket on it, cut it. Don't forget to put your tone ring back in here for your crank position sensor. Got my new gaskets and everything in the cover all cleaned up here, and a new crank seal, front crank seal. So I'm just about ready to pop it in there. I'm just going to clean a little bit more silicone off some of the mating surfaces, put some glue on, and I'm going to put that back in. Okay, got everything back together. Water pump's in. Four bolts for your water pump. They're going to be similar to these length to the timing cover bolts. They're pretty much the same thing. 20 foot-pounds torque on those. I like to put a little bit of anaerobic sealer. You can see some coming out there on the O-ring, and just buff that up, that housing, when you replace the water pump, of course. A couple things though, this video isn't necessarily about how to change the guides, the tensioners, and the timing chains themselves, because there's lots of videos on how to do that. This video is more about just the truck that it's in, is what I found. So you're gonna find that back there, getting this valve cover back on, it's not bolted down or anything, I just put it in. But that harness, it makes it a lot more difficult than it seems right now. So you gotta lift it up pretty high to get it over. So the gaskets stick in pretty good, so don't worry too much about those. But basically that harness is gonna bind up on you again. And like I say, you have to reroute it so it goes over top of this AC line here instead of underneath. Anyway, just you know, lift those harnesses up and push it back in there and it'll pop in for you. Other thing that you want to remember to do is, if you threw all your bolts in a pile, forgot where these studs are, there's only 4 on this engine, but there could be 5 depending on what the vehicle you're working on is. So this 2005 F150's got air conditioning, and this has got 4 studs. So just remember that your bottom studs are going to be smaller. They take those little nuts on like 10 millimeter, pardon me, wrench will have on those. So those are this one's going to be longer on the driver's side. So you can see that it would interfere with your belt if you put it on the passenger side. So this bolt, timing cover bolt, is going to have your small short stud, bottom passenger side, small long stud, bottom driver's side. Then you've just got timing cover bolts, except for this one here. This one was listed as a stud like these top ones, but on this, of course, there wouldn't be a stud because it would interfere with your power steering pump pulley. So that one is just like a, whatever these are, 19 millimeter, I think, or 17 millimeter, 18 millimeter maybe, whatever. Anyways, you'll figure it out. Head on that one. That's where it goes, behind your power steering pump pulley. So if you got these mixed up, it's not a big deal, because just remember your big ones go in the top here on each side of your timing cover by your underneath your valve cover. Same on this side to hold your brackets, and then of course these little resistors and stuff like that, these ones here, bolt onto those studs, hold them on. You'll remember that from disassembly. So just a couple things to keep in mind. Now at this point, take off your cam holding tools. Of course, don't put your, I know nobody would be dumb enough to do something stupid like that. That was just an imitation of my older brother, the way he talks. Anyways, make sure you take your holders off, your cam holders, before you put your valve covers on, of course, because they wouldn't even go on with them on. Anyways, that was kind of a dumb reminder, but you just never know. Tone ring is on the crank tensioner pulley, so I'm going to put my harmonic balancer on next. Got some new pulleys too, so I'm going to place all these, the tensioner pulley, idler pulley, idler pulley, idler pulley, are all going to get replaced while I'm in here, and the water pump as well for 40 bucks, whatever the water pump is. Now's the time to do it. Probably start leaking in a week after. It's usually the way it goes. After you get it back together, you got to take it all apart. Remember that on the F150, the connector for your cam position sensor is hard to get at, so plug that in, right away before you put these brackets on this on this little stud here. So before you put that nut on, just make sure that's plugged in, because it's, you can probably get at it, but it's just tough to click it in. You don't want to break that connector, you don't want to break that sensor either, because you can see you've got to take your AC pump off to get that off. So make sure that's done. What I did when I took this off, because it's hard to unplug, I actually just took this bolt out, and when I pulled the timing cover off, I just pushed the sensor out and left it here. Unplugged it after, put it back into the timing cover when I had it off on the bench and I was cleaning it and putting new gaskets and everything in it. I just popped the crank position sensor back in and then plugged it in when I put the timing cover back on. Remember to tighten your 4 bolts underneath your oil pan as well. I haven't done that yet either, so make sure you do that before you get too far in and start putting stuff on like the fan, and then you can't get at it and you got to take it all back apart again and it'll make you go postal. Anyways, that's where I'm at now. I'll do another update here in a few minutes. Yeah, what I was going to mention is, well, anyway, the oil filter, you'll find that to get the last couple bolts in the power steering pump when you put it back on, it's a lot easier with the oil filter off. You're probably going to be doing an oil change anyways. After you got the engine opened up like this, it's not a bad idea. So I did find a couple of bolts. With these bolts, if you don't torque them up, there's neoprene gaskets, so you can just snug them down and make sure those gaskets are tight, but don't over tighten, because like I said, if you break one off and it's one of the back ones, it's going to be a real pain. I like to just put some anti-seize on them because they're going to an aluminum housing. So other than that, this is coming together pretty nicely. I'm going to put some pulleys on here, get the belt on. I've got the harmonic balancer on, so like I was saying, I just stuck a pry bar in there. Just be careful that it doesn't jam up against the housing or like the cover or something, and in a place that could crack it. And I just held it with that pry bar and I was able to tighten the bolt to 70 foot-pounds. So it's looking good going back together now, and I think the worst is behind us at this point. So I'm going to carry on. I'll show you a couple more videos here as I put some more parts on. All right, so I talked about changing these idler pulleys while you're in there, and now's a good time to do it. This truck's got 160,000 kilometers, around 100,000 miles on it. This one was actually starting to seize up. It was tough to turn it. You can't really hear that. It's hard to spin it fast enough with one hand, but anyways, you can see that the bearing looks like. So it was done. And when these go, they can sound just like a power steering pump going. I've seen a noisy power steering pump changed with a rebuilt Napa one, and of course the assumption was made, oh well, it probably was a bad rebuild. I've seen those bad right from brand new, and the pump was replaced with another one, warranted. The truck made the exact same noise. It turned out it was one of these idler bearings that was gone, but it sounded exactly like a power steering pump going. But something to keep in mind. So for the amount of money that it is, you could, even if you want to save some money, buy a bearing, press it out, press a new one in. Well, you got this apart, now is the time to do this. So that's the one of the old ones. This is a grooved pulley. I bought a new grooved pulley for it. I wasn't gonna bother packing these bearings, but I think I will now. You can see there's not a lot of grease. There's just enough to get it off warranty. In new bearings, you may find that. And got another guy in the shop here. Got another guy in the shop here making noise. So okay. Anyways, so what I like to do is just use a good high quality bearing grease. It's like he's doing that on purpose, like when I crank it. See what I mean? Anyway, so if you're really careful, just take an O-ring pick or a dental pick like this and just pry the seal out. Usually you can do it, if you're careful, without damaging the seal. If you do damage the seal a little bit, I wouldn't worry too much about that, because if there's enough grease in here, it should stay in there and you'll still get better life out of it than what it is from brand new. So that's what I like to do, is just pop the seal out, put some good synthetic bearing grease in there, put the seal back in, and then install your tensioner pulley. So that's, I'm glad that I decided to replace these, because both of these smooth pulleys were in really bad shape. Okay, new pulleys are in place, new tensioner is in place, belt routing, since the sticker that shows me the map for belt routing got blown off, pressure washing it. I had to find one online, but that's pretty easy to do. So what you want to do is fold your belt and push it through here, go around your air conditioning compressor, over tensioner, around the crank, back of the pump drives your fan, back down over your grooved pulley, power steering underneath your idler pulley. I'll get back a little further so you can see it better. Over the alternator, and then back down underneath this tensioner pulley. Here's the way it goes. So usually what I find works good is run it over all your grooved pulleys and put your 1/2-inch drive breaker bar into your tensioner, back the tensioner off, and then push it underneath one of your smooth pulleys. Is going to be the easiest way to put the belt on. So now's a good time to replace your fan belt. The one on this truck was shot, it was all cracked up, and definitely in need of replacement. So this should be good now. The tensioner pulleys, pardon me, not the tensioner pulley was gone too, but the idler pulleys were in really bad shape, the bearings in them. So these are all repacked. I popped the seals out, repacked them with good synthetic grease. So they should be good for another 100,000 miles, hopefully, and hopefully that's a long time. After the service life in this fleet, I'm hoping this thing goes to auction soon. Another thing that I should have done, but I didn't this time around, but when you have your cooling system open and your antifreeze drain, quite oftentimes you'll, at least in my experiences, you'll have problems with the thermostat after. So I didn't replace the thermostat. I'll just wait. It's not that hard to get at. If I need to pop the thermostat in it later, I will. But that's something that you should think about doing while you're doing the timing chains. So I've seen a few videos online where they just put all the old stuff back on, depending on the age of the engine and the miles, you know, and how the condition that things are in. I guess you could do that, but right now, for the price of this stuff and the condition that I found that it was in, now's the time to replace all that stuff while you got it apart and it's easy to get at. So I'm gonna carry on now. Next thing I'm gonna do is get my fan and shroud in here. A couple more bolts I gotta put in here and there to hold some clamps down and stuff like that, and fill it with oil and antifreeze. Get my air cleaner on and the rad hose and that. Fill it with oil and antifreeze and fire it up. So as I mentioned earlier in the video, that what part of the timing chain guide when I had it apart had went missing, and I thought it was my mistake here to do this. I thought that it was a small enough piece of the timing chain guide that it would just be laying in the bottom of the oil pan and wouldn't cause any problems. But if you look on the forums and research this topic, this is an example of what you'll find. The pieces of the timing chain guides will end up in the pickup of the oil pump. So that's what's happened here, and you can see how much oil flow that would restrict. You're looking at close to probably 40% of oil flow, you know, a rough estimate. So that's a big problem with these engines, and that's something that I found when I took the oil pan off. The reason why I took the oil pan off this engine and was looking in here is because the timing, even though it needed new timing chains and it needed new timing guides and tensioners and all those upgrades, that didn't actually, it still ended up making noise after I replaced all those parts. Very frustrating, and it was a big learning experience on my part. So I'm going to show you as the video goes on what actually was wrong with this engine. But when I did take the oil pan off, because it was still making noise, that's the first thing I saw. So I'm going to go ahead and upload some more video and pictures here and tell you what happened. Hey. After changing all the timing components out in the oil pump, there was slap on the timing chain, so it did need timing chains. One of the guides was broken. It was still making noise, so check that out. That piston doesn't really look normal, so it's hitting the crank by the looks of it. I'm not too sure if it's a crank bearing at this point, or if it's the rods are all tight, or if it's a wrist pin bearing, but there isn't any play in the bearings on this thing, so I have no idea why that piston's rubbing or contacting the crank, but I'm pretty sure that's where the knock's coming from. Dang it. So more work on this thing, not really worth it, but you know, we're in this far, so I think it's going to be a decent, excuse me, gotta wipe some oil off my face, decent used short block, I guess. Anyway, keep you posted. Okay, so this is what I ended up finding wrong with this engine. As I mentioned, this engine, it's kind of a long story, but anyways, it started out with timing train noise. So it was problems with the timing chain slapping the front cover. It made a lot of noise, but it still had kind of a knock noise. It sounded like it was deeper in the engine after I had changed all the timing chain components out. after I cleaned up the oil pump pickup, all those things, put the engine back together, it still made noise. So my suggestion is, if you're in that far, just take the oil pan off. And actually my mistake was, I had the oil pan off, but I didn't notice that this piston was hitting the crank. There's two, you can see the parts on the bottom of the piston where it's a bit shinier, but the rod was bent. And that's the reason why the piston was contacting the crank on the bottom, and it was knocking, and it was also running rough. This engine had a lot of problems. It was timing chains, then it had a bent connecting rod, and the reason why the connecting rod was bent on this engine is because the intake manifold, if you look through the forums, there's only a couple posts that I could find, and it was only for a few years of the 4.6 Ford, and 2008 was one of those years. That's what this engine was, is the spacers, there's metal spacers in the intake manifold, and those spacers corrode and they start to spread as the corrosion will spread the manifold away from the cylinder head, and there's coolant passages in there. Those coolant passages will leak coolant usually to the outside. This engine unfortunately leaked coolant into the intake port. It went past the intake valve, and that's why it just all of a sudden started this knocking noise. Like, it always had that timing chain tick, and I was hoping this truck would go to auction, like I mentioned, but eventually the noise got worse and louder. So it turned out it was a couple of different things that were making noise. It was the chain slapping, that quietened it down a little bit, but then it turned out that there was a bent connecting rod from the intake manifold. The reason why I found the intake manifold problem was because I decided to pull this engine out, and then we were going to decide whether it was worth fixing this engine or ordering a new short block. Because this truck is very close to going to, it should have already been out of the fleet already, but it didn't go to auction, so they decided to fix it, and for the basically just replace what absolutely needed to be replaced on this engine. So that was trying to get a connecting rod. Now the reason why I'm talking in this video and explaining all this long story is because the connecting rod wasn't available. The only place I could get a connecting rod was like racing H-beam rods from Summit Racing. And of course, on an old fleet truck like this, you would never do something like that. So I ended up getting a refurbished connecting rod from eBay. I called wreckers, I called engine rebuilders, machine shops to see if they had a 4.6 Ford connecting rod in stock, laying around somewhere that I could buy and just get this thing back on the road and running for a few more years, or a year, or whatever it's going to be until it goes to auction. And I couldn't find a connecting rod anywhere. So the refurbished one off eBay was what I ended up ordering. It took quite a long time to get to us in Canada with the whole pandemic situation and everything. This is a while ago now. I lost my memory card, and my videos have been kind of on hold. So I've been planning to make this video, and I've been really busy, but I just haven't gotten around to it. So I did make the follow-up. Anyways, so the intake manifold, when I took the engine out, I saw the intake manifold. One port was really clean, and that was the one that had been getting coolant into it. And then it just finally leaked enough coolant that it was enough to get into the cylinder head. You know, just everything happened at the same time. The intake valve was open. It leaked into the cylinder and hydraulicked it and bent the connecting rod. So I ended up replacing the rings and the connecting rod. I just cleaned the piston up and reused the piston. So that's something that you have to realize with these engines, is parts they're not being supported by Ford. I called the dealership and they didn't have a connecting rod available. So that's what I ended up doing with this one. I got it back on the road. Another problem this engine had, there was a recall on 5.4s, but I couldn't find one on the 4.6 liter because they use different injectors. But this one did also have leaking fuel injectors, and that can also hydraulic and bend a connecting rod. And that was a problem with the 5.4s. I didn't see any recalls on the 4.6, but that definitely was a problem with this engine, because even after I did all the work on it and everything was back together, it still ran rough, and I ended up getting a Rich Bank 2 code out of it. The check engine light came on, and I replaced all the fuel injectors on that bank because they definitely must have been dribbling, and that was what was making it run rough. So you could do it a little bit if you wanted to spend a little bit more time. You could go through it and try and diagnose which injector, but if it's got a Rich code and there's an injector dribbling. The rest of them are probably not far behind it, so I just changed all 4. I didn't change all 8 injectors because the parts store in town didn't have that many available unless they were back ordered. So again, we had problems with sourcing parts. And the other reason why is because I'm just trying to replace what's absolutely has to be replaced and wrong with this engine so that it can just carry on for another year, whatever it takes, and then go to auction. So at this point, the truck is running. They're using it on a daily basis and things are holding together. It hasn't had any major engine issues, but I wish I had taken more video of when I took the engine out and I took the engine apart and I took this rod out of it. Unfortunately, I didn't, and like I say, some of the video was on my camera and I lost my memory card that I had. But anyways, my video, like these videos in my channel, is about interesting builds, but also about helping people, and especially with problems like this one that take a little while to diagnose and find out what's wrong. This is the kind of information that I really want to get out there and share with people, so that when you run into these problems, you'll be able to make a decision quickly, diagnose the problem, and figure out what you want to do. And in this case, it would probably be, if you really loved your truck, you're going to just order a rebuilt short block and put the engine back together, because like I say, you can't get connecting rods for these anymore. So that's something that I want to get out there. I will have more videos coming. I'm hoping to do some more updates on my Harley handlebars videos, but I got to find my memory card now. So I wanted to get something on because I haven't made a video for a while, and I noticed that the first video in this series got quite a few views. So I definitely want to thank everybody for that. And if you like these videos, smash the like and subscribe button, and there'll be more coming. And take care. Keep on wrenching.